realize that, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull. So then we watched the building collapse.
They ignored it because they wanted it to happen. Every void starts with a false flag operation.
The whole beetle idea was to do what you want, right? To take your own responsibility, do what you want, and try not to harm other people, right? Do what thou wilt, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody. John Lennon, in an interview with Playboy magazine. We are back for part 2, which is technically episode 11 of Historica Esoterica.
Correct.
Once again, Master Magus Matt K. Ultra, joined by my studious acolyte, who has, since we last met, been promoted to the second order of Historica Esoterica.
That's correct. I am now an Adeptus Major.
There we go.
Yeah.
So where last we met, we were speaking about Aleister Crowley, and we realized we had been recording for almost an hour, and we were on page 3 of my 7 pages of notes, which I probably bear some responsibility for, but we decided to just split this one up in 2. I did the episode art for this one, which is fun.
Yeah, you did a good job. It's funny because like on the one where you went buck wild and had 7 pages worth of notes, it also happens to be the one where I'm in my jazz era of notes where I just have like names and concepts written down. I'm like, yeah, I'll just relook it up when we get to it.
Yeah, which, to be clear, is probably a healthier way to approach the subject of Aleister Crowley than what I did, which is to say just dive headfirst back into this world that I've been out of for a year or 2.
It's a bummer, but I think maybe the way we can start this off, as you had mentioned earlier, is we had talked about Thelema, which is his religion that he made, and you thought it might be a good idea to explain what Thelema is briefly and what their beliefs are, so we can get more of a concept of what was he really up to in the early 1900s.
Yeah, for sure. And so, we're not going to spend too much time on it because, frankly, it could be its own episode, right? I know we say this all the time, but we're true, and we're telling the truth when we say this. Thelema it's like an esoteric occult religion, basically. It's, if you follow it, you're a Thelemite. The idea is, funnily enough, I have all these notes and I didn't write anything down about Thelema, so you guys get to hear me going off the dome on this one. But the general idea of it, right, its core principle is that statement from the Book of the Law. If you know something about Crowley, it's probably do what thou wilt, right? He taught that your will, right, this core essence of you, your pure desire and self, the only moral imperative that a person has is to follow their will. And if you think to yourself, well, now, that seems like it could lead to people getting hurt. Oh boy, you're right.
Yep.
But I think there is value to it, right? Like this idea of a person's value and free will and things like that. That's good, but I do think that it's also like very close to like Ayn Rand and objectivism. This idea that all you have to do is do what you want. You aren't beholden to other people at all.
It also kind of reminds me of the like tenets of Satanism a little bit. Like a little
Funny
less.
you should say.
I was going to say like a little bit less of a less aggressive version of that. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, as we'll get into later, Anton LaVey, big fan of Crowley. What a surprise!
Shocker.
I can't believe that the other loser edgelord of that century was a big fan.
Many.
Can
we talk about the logo?
Oh yes, the logo. This hexagram.
You'll see it on the art for the episode you're currently watching. It's a unicursal hexagram, which means it's made with like one line.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. I was going to praise them for it while you were talking. I was looking it up because I was like, it's a really cool symbol. Well, he didn't make it. Some other guy, some Italian occultist
Well,
made
hang
it,
on
you
now.
know. What?
I don't like the stank you put on Italian there.
Hey, I am also half Italian.
All right, good point. Good point.
The stank was more for occultists, so I apologize.
Okay, fair
Italians
enough.
still good.
Italians they caught a stray there, but
They,
you know.
right. It's real interesting because like he took this kind of already like occult symbol, and then just like threw a lucky charm in the middle of it, or like it was a 5-leaf clover is what it looks like. I'm not
Mhm.
exactly sure. And then he was like, yes, now that is our logo. And I think that's really interesting, but it's also really interesting because this shape has been seen in a lot of like pop culture. One that kind of made me like really interested is it's seen as in the Loki show most recently in Marvel at the end of episode. Which was
Yeah,
kinda like,
I did not watch the Loki show very closely, which is to say at all. I was just kind of like in the same room as my family when they watched it.
That's exactly how I experienced it.
But while I was doing research, I saw it mention that, and I was like, oh, that's...
it's weird.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Just kidding, I do. I feel bad. I don't like it, but...
Yeah, it's very strange, but I guess it's not it's you know, it's a 6-pointed star, right? So he's kind of relating it to, you know, if you think of other pointed stars which are used in esotericism, namely like the pentagram, this would be considered like similar to the pentagrammaton, which is the kind of like the 5-pointed star. So like, you know, it's just kind of right in line with that long tradition of, you know, taking simple shapes and making them mean something.
Yeah, well, and also, you know, it's a 6-pointed star, right? So it's also just like every other occult thing. It is just like stealing something from Judaism and then just warping it hideously and making it your own thing. You know, so like it's the most occult symbol you could imagine, basically.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
you know, it looks kind of cool, mostly scary. And it carries with it all sorts of subtext.
Good logo design, though.
Yeah, good logo design. There's a reason I put it on the episode art, and then got scared of my episode art. Went, ooh.
I know, it's a little spooky.
It's kind of spooky, but that's okay. I like to lean into the spooky a little bit.
Well, and there's enough like you know, righteous light radiating from the two of us that I think we'll be able to combat the forces of darkness.
We balance it out.
We do.
But so the other things I want to note, speaking of things on the episode art, the other big Thelemic thing I want to talk about, right, is
right.
Because we talked about like the Scarlet Woman, we talked about Will and things like that on the other episode as well. I do want to talk briefly though about the concept of like aeons or eons. Aeon sounds so much more mystical. So basically, according to Thelema, and this is from the Book of the Law, right? There's different aeons of mankind. So the first one was the Aeon of Isis, the god from Egyptian mythology, not the terrorist cell. And
your favorite terrorist.
Yeah. Well, hang on now. But not. So it was a maternal Aeon, effectively, right? So like matriarchal society, worshipping of like female goddesses,
kind of Gaia-ish worship.
Like Gaia stuff. And then from there we get the Aeon of Osiris, right? So the very like patriarchal sense, right? As we sort of move into the more like medieval age and things like that. Well, I guess probably earlier than the medieval age, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And what we're in right now, according to Crowley, is the Aeon of Horus. So this is obviously of Horus, right? So the sun is what we're in basically, and it was defined by a lot of things, but one of the big things that he had was the word abrahadabra, right? Which I put along the bottom there. Yeah. Which is in and of itself a very big, like it's a Thelemic spell, right? Hang on here. Let me double check the exact meaning before I just throw that out there.
Is it any relation to abracadabra, which is what magicians say at kids' parties before they throw a card at them?
Yes. So yeah, here's what it is. Actually, I'm gonna read straight from the Wikipedia because frankly, I was slacking and forgot to put actual notes. So we're just gonna borrow from some other people out there. Yeah. All right, so Crowley replaced the C in abracadabra with an H, which the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, in their neophyte ritual, linked with breath and life, as well as the god Horus. So, effectively, what he was doing there is he was making it, I don't remember the exact translation, but I looked it up, while I was doing the research, and like I said, I just forgot to write it down. But where abracadabra means I create as I speak in Aramaic, abrahadabra, roughly speaking, it means I create the speech in Hebrew. And I would like to note, I don't speak Hebrew, but if I had to hazard a guess, I'm going to assume that roughly speaking is doing a lot of work in that phrase. That's, again, like I said, that's the occult thing, right? Like you steal something and then just go like, man, this is what it means now. I've changed it.
Exactly.
But in terms of like numerology, right? Like the different, like the 5 of the microcosm, the 6 of the macrocosm, these are things that he writes about and all sorts of things. 5 and 6 are blended together to make abrahadabra, or 11, which is why I thought that episode 11/10 was a good time to chat about Crowley, right? That's the Aeon that we are in now. And then the future Aeon, actually, let me double check. It was, yes. So there's some Thelemites who believe that the Aeon of Mot will succeed the present one, and a couple of them have already said that it did, and that basically Crowley arriving is what changed that one. But the 3 main Aeons that everybody agrees on are Isis, Osiris, and then Horus. And do what thou wilt is the law of the Aeon of Horus. So...
I'm sorry, are we in Horus now then?
We definitely were when Crowley was around.
Okay, gotcha.
There's some Thelemites say that like we're not anymore. We've moved out of it.
Gotcha.
If you look around you, I think we're still in it. If we're just going vibes based, people are still doing what they wilt.
That's true. Yeah, especially now.
Yeah, let me tell you, for some of them, that is the whole of the law, which I think is bad. But
I agree.
Anyway.
Agree. Can we talk about briefly the name Thelema?
Yeah, for sure.
I have some insights on that if you'd like to talk about that. So, like,
go for it.
Etymology, as obviously as a Christian, etymology is very important to me. So I was curious what Thelema meant, and it comes from a Greek word, which is from classical Greek, thelema, which is one of the 2 words for will, as in like your will, your volition, which fits right in line with what we were just talking about. It's not super commonly used. You see it in some Homer and some other stuff, but it's not like a common word, but it is a classical Greek word, so he was smart on that one. Interestingly, it is used in the Septuagint, which is the Greek rendering of the Old Testament, as well as some places in the New Testament. In the Septuagint, it's used when talking about the will of God, like high righteous will, and then it's used a couple times like your will be done in heaven and on earth, in the New Testament. So that's kind of an interesting place for him to pull it. There's also a monk from the Benedictine time named Francois Rabelais. I'm sorry again, France, for butchering.
Eventually we'll do them right.
Yeah, maybe. He had an Abbey of Thelema. So
that's interesting.
It's not a real place, but it's something he was writing about in his essays, I guess, like a utopia idea.
I have bad news for him.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think he had Crowley in mind when he was penning this. I think it was sort of like a satire supposed to like throw light on the times he was living.
Oh,
in.
I see.
Yeah. So that's essentially the long and the short of it.
Yeah, sweet. Well, our somewhat rambling introduction and discussion of Thelema aside, which, to be clear, is a knock on me and not on Roswell.
No, I think we're both at fault here.
Let's pick back up with Aleister Crowley. So just a little roadmap for you guys. What we're gonna do, we're gonna finish talking about Aleister Crowley and his life and his dastardly deeds, which up until this point, frankly, haven't been that dastardly. He's just kind of been an abusive boyfriend.
Yeah.
But they get
disaster
kind of bad.
Bisexual, as you said.
Yeah, he's been a disaster bisexual.
Yeah.
Now he is a criminal.
Yeah.
So things are taking a turn for the darker territories.
Yeah.
And then after that, we're going to talk about his problematic fans. Because oh boy,
are they?
You talk about a toxic fan base. I mean,
yeah.
Nobody's got anything on Crowley.
Yeah. Sorry, Star Wars.
So around this time, one final note about his time in America, though, before I forget.
Yeah.
He also spent some time down in Mexico, just sort of hanging out. He was bouncing all around, the American continent. And he, did some more sex magic rituals down there, because what do you expect from a guy like this? But
you gotta.
Yeah. And then he returned to London. And around then, his mom died as well. So
Yeah.
he didn't get as big of an inheritance as he did when his dad died, but he got, I think it was a couple $100,000 in today's money. So not bad either. He's doing all right
Yeah.
again. Which for Crowley, of course, will not last. What a
Right.
surprise. But he developed a fairly serious heroin addiction around this time as well, as a doctor prescribed it to treat his tuberculosis and asthma, which is truly a better era for medicine,
Yeah.
I think.
So
where-
funny. Yeah.
He's like, here, have some opium. That will stop you from coughing. But then he moved to Sicily in 1920, founding the Abbey of Thelema, which was a lot of bad stuff happened here, mostly sex and heroin.
Yeah.
And he moved out here with a couple of his most devoted Thelemites. A few more would trickle in and
Yeah.
out throughout the years. Most notably, Jane Wolfe, a film star.
I saw that. That was
who
weird.
was super, really interesting character. She was super influential in like spreading the OTO through like Pasadena and California,
Mm,
a place which has had a lot of just weird little occultist freaks
Yeah.
running around it ever since. Basically, she started this apocalypse, but
mm.
it's, I don't know, this house, it didn't have running water or indoor plumbing or electricity. It was just, there was a lot going on in this little house, but none of it was good because, you know, there were no bathrooms inside
Yeah.
it. So hygiene very quickly went out the window. There were also, at one point, 4 kids just sort of running around in here with these Thelemite.
It's
freaks.
Yeah, sex freaks, essentially.
Yeah,
Wh-
and
it-
it's
It's sort of what you expect from your, run-of-the-mill cool magic cult, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
commune or whatever. Yeah. No
Yeah,
offense to
there
people who
was
live
a-
on communes, but
yeah, I was gonna say this one was not done correctly.
this is a bad
Uh,
example.
Yeah, and there were piles of drugs just like left out everywhere. And,
there's just weird,
yeah.
like screeching sounds coming from outside. I think it's
I
like
hope-
somebody's brakes, but it.
Okay,
It sounded
good. Yeah,
spooky.
sorry, you just kept going like
Yeah, I know. I was like, what is that? Anyway, continue.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good. So yeah, the conditions in the house were not great. There were, piles of drugs just sort of left around,
Yeah.
cocaine, alcohol, heroin, so much heroin was just
Yeah.
out there. And then, of course, like I said, there was no plumbing, and people did not feel the need to walk outside
Yeah.
in order to deal with that. They were
Yeah.
just kind of like corners and rooms.
And they're
Uh,
all wearing robes, right? And performing
Yep.
sex magic. And supposedly,
Performing sex magic.
you know, Crowley is allowing the kids to witness these events,
Mhm.
which is bad.
Yeah, it's just bad. There's no way around it. Like
it's horrible.
the writings say, and even like the people who like hated him and were there later on. So I do believe that this didn't happen, because I feel like if anybody had a reason to take Crowley down, it would be the people who left this house.
Mm.
But they say he never involved the kids directly, but he did allow them to watch, which is not good.
Yeah.
It's very bad. And he similarly, and his idea was that it would be good for them, right? Because it would rid them of the shame around such an act. But also, they were like, I think the oldest was 6 at the time. Like, it's too young
It's too
to
young.
involve a kid
Yeah,
in something
and it's
like
just
this.
not how you do it. That's gonna mess up.
Yeah. And then, he also allowed them to like try the drugs too, for the same
Right.
idea, where he's like, well, then they won't be tempted later on because they'll know what it's like. Heroin is one of the most addictive things on the planet. It's okay to not give it to your children.
Yes,
Don't worry.
absolutely.
So it's very like, it's almost like weird scenes inside the canyon
Yeah.
kind of thing. Speaking of Dave McGowan, right? It feels very similar to like some of those stories about like, like Singers of the Doors, just like bringing kids in and like giving them acid or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just
Yeah.
weird stuff. That's the moment where, like I said, like it goes from like, because, even what he was doing with like Neuberg, right? It's not good.
Right.
But-
But it's not evil. It's just like
Yeah.
toxic.
It's just bad.
just bad
toxic.
behavior.
It's bad.
Like if he did
Or,
that,
like-
and then like the chapter turned in his life, and he like found God and just like became like a cool, docile man, we'd be like, well, it was
Yeah.
bad that he was doing that, but like he really turned it around. But now you've sort of hit this point of no return where it's like, there's nothing you can say to defend that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And of course, this whole time his heroin addiction was spiraling out of control too. So like it's just darkness
It
at this
is.
period.
Yeah, and he's also
Um,
having cocaine addiction. I don't know if you mentioned that already.
cocaine
and it's
addiction,
like I believe I read somewhere that like it was like actually affecting like eroding his actual nasal cavity.
Like an 80s movie executive. He like
Yeah.
had to get reconstructive surgery
Which-
because his like nasal cavity like collapsed.
Again, I'm not
Uh,
shaming someone for being addicted to drugs. It's just like kind of like to illustrate like the conditions that the children were
Yeah.
being exposed to, you know.
Yeah, and it's exactly, and it's something that you see throughout Crowley's life, right? Is he never does anything halfway. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I personally enjoy hiking. I'm not going to try and climb K2, but that's where Crowley and I are different, right? Like he tries to become like the greatest mountaineer ever.
Yeah.
He does as many drugs as possible.
Yeah.
He becomes the wickedest man in the world. Like there's this just tendency to just dive into
Yeah.
extremes.
Here's the thing is like that quality, I think if it was channeled into other directions, and maybe if he were less volatile personality, it could be such a good quality. And he could have accomplished so much good with like that drive and that ambition.
Yeah, and admittedly, it's what made him such an effective magician, right? Because like I was saying in the last episode, for better or for worse, he was in touch with his will at all times.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I said, it ruined a lot of lives,
Yeah.
but he knew what he was doing. And as far as magic goes, right, the application of your will into reality and like changing things, like it had effects.
Yeah.
Whether you think he was literally casting spells or not, there was something powerful about his willpower.
Absolutely.
But like I said, like this environment obviously really bad for the kids.
Yeah.
And his infant daughter died of neglect while she was in the house because, you know, all of her guardians were like, junkies who were high or having sex and ignoring things, and just not a good environment. And Crowley, I guess to his credit, was very upset by this. He retreated to Paris to mourn.
Yeah.
Like he just left because he didn't want to be around there.
Yeah.
And in his absence, things just sort of continued to fall apart. Because that's the other thing you see a lot, is that his presence and his will, you know, domineering and evil though it frequently was, really did hold everything together. And when he leaves, all the other people just sort of start to fall apart.
Yeah.
Uh,
I just gotta say it's just a tragic note, you know. I think this is his daughter dying is sort of kind of like the apex of like how neglect and selfishness can really destroy other people's lives as well. And so like if there's anything thematically that you're going to take away from studying Crowley, it's like you reap, you know, the classic you reap what you sow. And if your whole life is spent, you know, just completely selfish, these are the type of things that are going to happen to you, you know.
Yeah.
And it's going to be tragic.
Yeah, and you know, he came back and they were there. He started, you know, like I said, that sense of darkness really keeps escalating. Like one of his other followers died in the house. There's two versions of the story. Crowley's version of the story is that the man drank mountain water and then got like a stomach bug from it. After, of course, Crowley told him not to.
Right.
Because, you know, how could he do something wrong?
Right.
And the man's wife, on the other hand, says that Crowley killed a cat and then forced the man to drink a cup of its blood after he messed up the ritual and failed to properly kill the cat himself.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to say which one I think is more realistic, but I think we both have a general theory.
Yeah, I think so. Well, and so another thing to say about this, the man who died, his name was Raoul Loveday, and his wife was named Betty May, and she was kind of against Crowley from the beginning, and then obviously after this, you know, she went to the press, but she also mentioned that they were required to cut themselves with razors every time they used the pronoun I, which is interesting. Which once again, the woke mob strikes again. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, but that's the thing, right? Is because that's the other thing you see with Crowley, like these things that do appear in other like magical like trainings and things like that. Right. Like the idea where it's like you have to punish yourself if you say a certain word.
Right.
That's something that shows up in a lot of different like ritual contexts or like ways of training someone's willpower. But it's so extreme and so dark. Like you know, this word that we use all the time.
Right.
And of course, that's why you choose that one, right?
Because it
is, it's reflexive. And then, you know, cutting yourself with a razor, like just one of, just an unpleasant thing. Just it's literal self-harm, right? And it's it's spiraling out of control. You sort of get that sense at this point of it. It's the third act of Goodfellas, right? The cocaine addiction is no longer fun. There's helicopters circling above, except these ones are being piloted by Mussolini because functionally, the end of Crowley's magical career,
Yeah.
at least as a serious magician, came in, I think it was 1923,
Yes.
when
April
Mussolini,
1923.
who was in charge of Italy, obviously the fascists weren't a big fan of
Yeah.
most things going on,
Yeah.
but the stories spreading around, in particular, once they like reached higher up members of the government, Crowley was deported.
Yeah.
And, notably, no one else in the house was. So he told them to just sort of keep going and hope that he could make his way back in there. But without him there, it fell apart pretty quickly.
Right.
And, so then he just sort of spent the rest of his life bouncing around Europe. He briefly thought that Hitler might become a Thelemite,
Yeah.
which is
I thought this
really
the
interesting.
quote was really interesting because like he was intrigued by Nazism, but then like the Nazis abolished the German chapter of the OTO, and imprisoned one of his like associates, kind of one of his contacts there,
And then he immediately turned
yeah,
on
and
Hitler.
and the thing I thought was interesting is he lambasted him, calling him a black magician, which I'm like, your whole thing is being like the wickedest man in the world and like doing spooky magic, and like how is that an insult to you?
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's very strange.
It's very
but,
strange.
Yeah, and I think, it's the same thing as what we were talking about before with his draw to Nazism,
Yeah.
right? Is also, notably at this point, at least I don't think at this point in time, people knew about like the Holocaust. I don't think that was like really fully in swing. I'm not sure about the timeline as to when he was praising Hitler, but this was sort of early on. Everybody sort of knew that the Nazis were taking power.
Yeah,
Most people knew that that was a bad thing.
right.
And I think that those two things alone will draw someone like Crowley to them, just to see like, well, how did this guy get so much power so quickly?
Right.
What's going on here? And also, the Nazis did have an obsession with the occult.
Yeah.
So I was surprised that they kicked out the OTO, but I guess it's more the idea of this old version of a secret society.
Yeah.
They wanted their guys to get in on it
exactly,
instead.
Yeah.
Because they had so many secret
they were on
societies.
their Graal quest, with
Yeah,
Otto
exactly.
Rahn. So
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so that's very interesting. Is this about the time? Oh yeah. So if are we jumping into World War II then?
Oh, sorry, I did skip accidentally, just briefly.
go ahead.
Like I said, my notes weren't super organized. So before the outbreak of World War II, he was in Berlin as well, and he hung out with people like intelligence asset Aldous Huxley,
Yep.
the writer, whose book *The Doors of Perception*, I would like to note, inspired the title of the classic rock band The Doors. So this weird little synchronicity there. He's
Yeah.
hanging out with the most MK'd guy of all time.
Yep.
This guy, Huxley, also introduced him to a couple prominent communists in the area. And so Crowley was kicking it with the communists for a little bit. He just, I think, was drawn towards anything controversial and extreme
For sure.
in terms of politics.
Yeah. Do you think the communists liked him?
I couldn't find much on it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that, like, do what thou wilt really would jive well with, like,
Exactly.
a Leninist, considering
Yeah.
there's sort of opposing ideologies.
Yeah.
And I think there's a reason that most of his biggest fans nowadays are like psycho-libertarians.
Right.
But yeah, so with the outbreak of World War II, I just have one little thing, and then I'll let you
Yeah.
hit us with whatever you got. But with the outbreak of World War II, he offered his services to the British intelligence
That's what I was
service,
going to talk about.
who officially turned him down.
Yeah.
Even though around this time he was still like hanging out with a bunch of spies,
Yeah.
like Ian Fleming and Roald Dahl.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That was what I was going to talk about, which I thought was just so fascinating. Like, another one was Maxwell Knight, Dennis Wheatley. So
Mhm.
you've got, occult novelists, children's novelists / Secret Service people. Ian Fremling, which is another novelist. What do you call that? Is that MI6 agent?
Yeah, he was in MI6.
Yeah. So it's like, it's just kind of, these interesting reoccurring themes that we get popping up where it's like, intelligence
Mhm.
asset and writer. And it's like,
Yeah. Or intelligence asset and magician.
exactly. And it's like, okay.
Weird.
It's weird. I can't say anything more than that, but it is
Yeah.
strange.
I mean, it's, like I've said before about like magic, right? Is whether or not you believe in it. Oh boy, so many spies and powerful people do. So I think it's something worth examining
Yeah.
and looking at the roots of. Because, maybe it is all fake, but
Yeah.
a lot of people sure are acting it out anyway.
Yeah, which, and if they're doing it, they certainly believe it, or at least believe in the power of the symbol, which,
Yeah,
what's the difference
Interesting.
at some point, if
Yeah.
you're still able to affect the world in a negative way, to bend
Yeah.
it to your will, to your dilemma.
So to speak.
Yeah, so to speak. But yeah, so do you want to get into Jack Parsons then, since we've kind of hit World War II?
Yeah. So as his health problems worsened, his finances, his money was gone again.
Right.
Crowley never met a dollar he didn't want to spend. So by this point, he's living mostly off of donations from old OTO members, and most prominent among them was our friend Jack Parsons.
Yeah.
Roswell, what would you like to tell us about
So,
our boy Jack?
so if you've heard about Jack Parsons already, and you're not our brand of schizoid, you probably know him like, oh yeah, he was one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which revolutionized rocket technology in the early 30s. Crazy effect. I think it eventually got absorbed into like NASA or something. Just
Eye emoji.
eye emoji. Yeah, he invented the first rocket engine to use castable composite rocket propellant, and pioneered the advancement of liquid fuel and solid fuel rockets. So he was very clever fella, very influential. Died mysteriously in a lab explosion, but we'll get to that. But he was also a Thelemite occultist, and
of course, friend of L. Ron Hubbard, as we
Exactly.
mentioned on our Knowing episode.
he had an affair with a woman who actually left him for L. Ron Hubbard. So it's like all these different little connections,
Yeah, all of these like spooked up people, every single one of the people we just mentioned has like so many intelligence connections.
Exactly.
And they're all floating around in this same little miasma.
Yes.
This goo generated by Crowley as he just sort of like slithers around.
So
Like a,
like a what?
I don't know. I lost my trail
Like
of
a
thought. I was
slithery
like,
slug.
because I was like, yeah, he slithers around, but he's generating goo. Is he like an eel or a slug, a long slug? Anyway,
Yeah, he's a
sorry,
long slug.
I didn't mean to get bogged down in this metaphor.
Something I wanted to illustrate, which I thought was interesting, not illustrate, something I wanted to mention that I thought was interesting was that right before converting to Thelema, Parsons was briefly involved with Marxism. I don't know if you knew that, which I'm like, that's another interesting thing. I don't know anything else about that. I just know that he was interested in it.
Yeah, I haven't done much looking into it. Honestly, I haven't done much looking into Jack Parsons at all. It's just that he just keeps coming up in other things I'm looking into.
Exactly.
One day we'll have to just really sit down and dedicate ourselves to him, because every single thing I have learned about him is just insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we said, he died in a mysterious lab explosion, which little weird. Much to consider there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where, again, like, we'll have to do some more research to find out more about it, but on the surface it's already just the whole thing smells from top to bottom.
Yeah, it's very strange.
It's very strange.
But yeah, then he so Crowley also at this point, very interestingly, at one point he sued one of the people from the house because she wrote a book about her time in the Abbey of Thelema, and he was so low on cash that he sued her, and pretty much in court walked back everything he had ever said about magic. He stopped like reveling in this title of the wickedest man in the world and was like, oh, I would never be a black magician. I would never do something like that. And it was just because he needed money. It's kind of sad to see that, right? He's very broken at this point in his life. He lived in a rented house in Hastings, where, as a side note, he trained Kenneth Grant in magic, and also met with Gerald Gardner, who founded Wicca. So again, like I said, even literally on his deathbed, he's having all of this influence.
It's very interesting. It's, I don't know, it's just strange how many people are interested in him that also happen to be quite influential. I know we've just been beating that horse all day, but it's just weird.
It's an important horse.
It's an important horse to beat to death.
Yeah, and then do you have anything more to say about him? Because I've just got 2 more things about his death, and then I think we can
Yeah, I've got something about his
carry
legacy
on.
after his death, so why don't you go ahead first?
For sure. So, like I said, it was in a rented house in Hastings where he died. There's 3 conflicting accounts, which I think is only fitting
Yeah.
for Aleister Crowley, is that nobody can even agree on what his last words were. So there's 2 different things for that. So some people say that he said, "I'm perplexed," and then died, which is the one I believe the least, because I think it's just too perfect. Like, this magician spending his entire life searching for this meaning, and on his deathbed, he goes like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah.
It's just, it works too well.
Very
There's no way that's what
fabulistic.
actually happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Others argue, and this is the one I'm inclined towards. Someone else said that he simply said, "Sometimes I hate myself," which
literally me.
I like that one a lot. Yeah, that one's pretty powerful. And then I think it was his wife. It was someone close to him. Offered a very different account of his final days, which is to say that he remained in good spirits up until his passing, and right as he died, wind blew through the room and thunder crashed in the distance as the gods bade him farewell. Which,
yeah, that happened.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
sure.
I believe you. And around the same time, one of the things he left behind was a drawing of one of the secret chiefs, one of the spirits with which he was communing, Lamb, the spirit, right? Which looks exactly like a gray alien. So, you want to talk about Jack Parsons and UFOs, or Crowley and Lamb? I don't know what this means, but it means something. I can tell. Go for it. Tell us what it means, Roswell.
I think we've not officially, but I think we found more evidence from my personal theory that aliens aren't real, and it all falls under the umbrella of the Jinn deception. That's right, baby.
Yeah, man. You know I'm with you.
I know you are. It's either that, or it's like one of those things. He's also like associated with all these, intelligence assets. So if they're faking aliens for, whatever reason they would do that,
Either or.
and
one of these days we're going to have to get in touch with the guys from Subliminal Jihad and just apologize for stealing the word jinn from them.
But I absolutely have appropriated it, but it's so good. I thought for a moment you said when we were going to get in touch, I was like, I hope he's not saying we're going to get in touch with Lamb, because we are not.
Oh, no, we are not getting in touch.
Okay, cool.
As we've said before, do not commune with the evil one. We're adding Lamb to that list. Don't talk to aliens.
And what was it? Brental floss?
Oh, AWAS?
AWAS, thank you.
You say dental floss?
Brental floss. You remember the guy from Anyway.
So yeah, did you have anything more to say about his the people he influenced? Because I've just got a list that we can go down after that. So
yeah, so there's just a brief thing talking about his death, about the kind of his life after death, if you will, which is the legacy he sort of left behind. Because he was notable while he was alive, but I think he became even more of a rock star posthumously, and so this kind of whatever you might think, this kind of, I think, embodies that. So this is the
for sure.
A quote from one of his biographies. I don't have the name of it on hand, apologies, but it says, the odd sea change Crowley underwent, transforming him from a scurrilous knave into a spiritual liberator, began, oddly enough, in France. In 1960, a book appeared that almost single-handedly triggered what's been called the occult revival of the 1960s, the history of which I chart in Turn Off Your Mind. There had been a slow buildup of interest in the occult through the late 1940s and 50s, with the rise of public interest in flying saucers and other weird concerns. Emanuel Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision, 1950, linked biblical accounts of the flood to the Earth's close shave with a comet, and T. Lobsang Rampa's doubtful account of his life as a Tibetan yogi, The Third Eye, 1956, had both been big sellers. But it was the appearance of Les Matins des Magiciens, 1960, by Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier that really triggered the return of magic. The book is a heady, often mind-numbing jumble of strange, new, and unusual ideas that took the Paris of Jean-Paul Sartre and existentialism by storm. It rambled...
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just want to highlight that real quick.
I knew you'd like that.
French freaks and philosophers, I knew they would be involved somehow.
Yeah. It rambled from...
Keep going.
No, you're good. It rambled from alchemy to UFO to Gurdjieff to ancient civilizations to mutants to occult Nazis to higher consciousness and then some, rather like Charles Fort's books of the 1920s and 30s. although much better written. It became a huge bestseller, and when it was translated into English in 1963 as The Morning of the Magicians, it was a bestseller too. And amid its mysterious thicket of all things occultly marvelous in the history of Theodore Roszak's words, was Crowley and the Golden Dawn. So, just there. And honestly, if you look back at like any media from like the late 60s, early 70s, you just see like that's when occult themes start popping off.
Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, for instance,
yeah, exactly. And I mean, even just like the movies, if you start to look at things like Rosemary's Baby and all those different things that start popping up. And we actually kind of briefly discussed this on our Winchester History House episode, where we talked about like in the early 70s when like the ghost kind of phenomenon started picking up too, and of course that's like right in line with like UFOs and occultism, which had already been gaining steam. So
all this darkness and insanity just sort of like spiraled out
as the Aeon of Horus continues forward.
Exactly. But yeah, so do we want to talk about some of these some examples of things like this?
Yes, absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So we mentioned already the Rolling Stones and the Hells Angel who committed the murder 60 years to the day after Crowley's fight with I don't remember the demon's name, probably for the best. But Kenneth Anger, who was training them in the ways of the occult at the time, also made a movie called Lucifer Rising,
right?
An explicitly satanic, in case you couldn't guess from the title, and Thelemic movie. And it also featured a soundtrack by Bobby Boussolier, or however you pronounce it. I think it's the A. Who was arrested for killing Gary Heineman in the Manson murders.
Right.
So,
oh wow.
Yeah. So Anger, this crazy influential Thelemite, is involved with the two things that like most people say ended the 60s, right?
Right.
And then interesting thing about Bobby, he later said that Manson had nothing to do with it, and it was a drug-related killing in which some bikers killed Gary over a bad batch of mescaline.
Right.
Which is just an interesting little note, although Susan Atkins just said, no, we killed him on Manson's orders, which does takes a little bit of the shine off of Bobby's story there. So just interesting, though, regardless, that Kenneth Anger's like just working with all of these people who just happen to end up involved with really powerful murders.
Right.
And then, of course, Led Zeppelin frontman and pedophile Jimmy Page.
So sad.
I know.
My favorite guitarist is a 13-year-old, and then you find out he's a pedophile, and you're like, God.
So, Led Zeppelin frontman and pedophile Jimmy Page posted up in Bullskin, that place right by Loch Ness where he was doing things. I want to say they filmed a movie there, and of course, also, Do What Thou Wilt was inscribed on the vinyl copies of Led Zeppelin 3, which...
There's
ominous.
So much occult stuff on Led Zeppelin 3, even the cover. Another thing. Another thing is the movie they were working on, was that the one Jimmy Page did the soundtrack to that was kind of like an occultish movie?
I don't
blanking
remember
on the name. Oh, I think he was originally set to do the soundtrack for Lucifer Rising.
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. He was going to that's what I was forgetting. Yeah. Page was going to do the soundtrack, and then I think it was that his wife didn't like Kenneth Anger or something. I don't remember the cause of the falling out there, but they had a falling out for something. And let's see, creating a soundtrack. Yeah, back in London, Anger met Jimmy Page with the rock band Led Zeppelin. He was working on it while he was in Bullskin House, which had once belonged to Crowley. Short after, Anger convinced Page to compose the soundtrack to Lucifer Rising. Anger publicly revealed that Page was to provide the soundtrack in February of 1972, but then in 1973, However, in October of 1976, Anger got into an argument with Page's wife, Charlotte, who threw him out of their London home. He was able to collect his belongings later that week, subsequently giving a press conference in which he lambasted both Page and his wife, stating that, quote, "I'm beginning to think Jimmy's dried up as a musician. He's got no themes, no inspiration, no melodies to offer."
That's so funny.
Which fat talk coming from the director of Lucifer Rising.
And also, like, time-wise, like, they had several more great albums in them. I hate to say it. What a dope.
Yeah, just truly a fool, that Kenneth Anger. And then, as we alluded to by which I mean openly stated in our opening quote. The Beatles, of course, were floating around Sergeant Pepper there. I mean, floating around Aleister Crowley with Sergeant Pepper, right?
Yeah.
I was looking it up, just trying to find like if they ever said anything about why he was hanging out on their album cover. There's some people who theorize he is the Sergeant Pepper, which
Interesting.
I wasn't super sold on, because the big reason I heard was like, well, it starts with them saying that like 20 years ago, the sergeant taught us how to be, or whatever like the opening lines to Sergeant Pepper are. And Crowley had died 20 years ago when they released the album. And I was like, that's a bit of a stretch. And then I found that quote where John Lennon straight up says, "Do what thou wilt" is the ethos of the Beatles. And
like,
well, it feels like less of a stretch. I don't know if I'm going to say I believe it, but I certainly understand why people might.
Absolutely. I just found something interesting that also relates, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
Marjorie Cameron, who we've talked about earlier, I'd forgotten about her, was the wife of Jack Parsons. I forgot to mention
his
that.
Scarlet Woman.
And his Scarlet Woman. And she also played the Scarlet Woman in a 1954 movie called The Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome by who?
Our boy.
That's right.
That's right. Kenneth Anger.
Returning villain.
Yeah.
And
he really is one of the returning villains.
For sure. Yeah. It's not going to be the last time we see him. But yeah, so just again, another one of these, incestuous connections between all these people.
And let's see. We also have, of course, Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan and Michael Aquino of the Temple of Set. I mean, I don't think we even need to say anything more here. My notes literally just say, we know about this already, just riff. Like, we know that they were big Crowley fanboys. We know that, like, LaVey is an insane Satanist, libertarian freak. We know that Aquino allegedly was involved with abusing children and did all sorts of nasty stuff.
Was in crazy, like, psyop warfare.
Doing the psyops. It's, let's see. What are the other things I've got? I had one or two other things. Oh, yes. So McGowan in Program to Kill also brought up something, another one of the ones that I had missed, which is, say, Alfred Kinsey. Do you know this guy?
Oh, from the Alfred Kinsey, he's a researcher, right? Like a
so
Kinsey
the
scale?
So-called Kinsey scale, the
which
very
is
same.
Like supposedly, and I guess now debunked, like way to measure homosexuality or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was the so-called father of the sexual revolution, who famously used interviews with pedophiles and entries from their journals to come to the conclusion that, quote, children are sexual beings from birth, which not good. That's really bad. And of course, he was a follower of Crowley's.
Of course he
was. And he, with his friend Kenneth Anger, visited the Thelema Abbey shortly before his death. So it wasn't in use at the time. This was later on.
Yeah.
But, they just made a little pilgrimage out to the site where a child died from exposure and neglect while heroin addicts were having sex in front of it. And I'm really glad that that's the guy who influenced the way that we viewed child sexuality for so long. And then final note, this is the one I have the least about, because all of the sites I tried to go to research it were in Russian. But Andrei Chernov was a Russian computer programmer, and according to his Wikipedia, a countercultural figure in Russia in like the 1990s, who helped lay the groundwork for what later became the Russian internet.
Interesting.
Which, once again, as the Wikipedia so dotingly notes, it helped prevent the disinformation campaigns that were being used during the attempted coup that would have, overthrown Yeltsin and Gorbachev and rightfully restored the Soviet Union to some of it. But no, I mean, there were no heroes by that point. It was just very funny that even in the Wikipedia article, you see like consent being manufactured there. So like even back then, the Russians were doing misinformation on the internet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, cool.
All right. Yeah.
But like I said, I tried to look more into this guy, but all of the websites on him were in Russian. And also someone with his name, Andrei Chernov, apparently got arrested in Moscow in like a high profile sting a couple years back. So all of the headlines I could find in English were about that Andrei Chernov.
Whoa.
And if I had had more time, I probably could have dug something up. But it was just, I decided it wasn't worth it. I just wanted to note that, Crowley's fanboys also helped create the internet in certain countries, which I don't like.
I don't like that. And I remember something something interesting. It might have been a subliminal jihad episode, not to quote them yet again, but they were talking about some of like kind of the esotericism like ingrained in like the early internet programming and like
Oh yeah.
kind of the weird stuff you see there. And it's like,
Hmm.
is the internet demonic, as we've talked about before? And
The
for
answer is yes.
I was gonna say, for all of our reasonable listeners out there, no, of course not. And then like we would nod vigorously at each other silently.
Yeah. Yeah, we're winking right
yeah.
now. You can't tell, but no, there's no demons on the internet.
I don't know if you mentioned this though. While I was like looking up this Andrei Chernov guy, he hosted a website called Venus.net, which contained a collection of various rare pieces of media, including anime. I just thought,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah, anime, and then like weird like French artistic movements
Yeah.
as well, like the people who like inspired like Munch and all those
Yeah.
guys. Like he was just he seems like a really interesting guy. Unironically, I would have loved to talk to him.
Yeah, for sure.
Because what an insane combination of things that I know about him from just skimming one or two articles online.
Yeah,
Um,
that's insane.
but all that is to say, Roswell, I'm just going to ask you, Aleister Crowley, your final thoughts, your conclusions.
I kind of mentioned it before, but just briefly again, like it's sort of I think his life is a cautionary tale in, selfishness, right? If you live only for yourself, there's an emptiness to it, but more importantly, there's a destructiveness to it, to the people who end up loving you, because people will end up loving you. That's just life, right? So I think it's just, we see that with his family. We see that with the many women and men who are romantic interests of him that are burned by him, his followers, people who trust him, who put faith in him, who kind of see him as like a paternal figure. It's just really a really kind of sad tale at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I think I'll leave our listeners with a call to action, which is be good, care about people. Like it's okay to be selfless sometimes. If you want to make me happy, do something for someone else this week for no reason. Just do it. It's fine.
And then follow us on social media.
And then follow us on social, yeah. And by do something for someone else, I mean mail me $1,000.
Yeah, but before we go into plugs, on a similar note, I just want to say, like I said, I've alluded to this before. Maybe on like a more relaxed episode, we've talked about doing something like that in the future. I might talk about like, my experience with like ritual magic and chaos magic.
I do want to know about it.
I did get into it for a little bit. And I mean, I wasn't even doing much, right? I wasn't like doing sex magic in front of children or anything insane like that, right?
I'm going to clip that for this week.
Hang on now. But like I wasn't doing anything crazy, but even then, like it did have a palpable impact on my life. Like I could feel differences, and whether it's because you're actually like getting in contact with otherworldly forces, or just because you're shaping your perception in a way that something's happening, just like our Grimoire episode, right? Whether you're contacting demons or not, sometimes you're just going to go insane because you're reading all these weird magic books and you just sort of lose touch with reality.
Absolutely.
So like I was saying before, with magic, just, if it's something you're going to do, be very careful and, don't involve other people unless they know what they're getting into, which they won't.
They generally won't. Yeah. Just be careful. And I don't know, use your common sense. Don't be weird. That is a new Historica Esoterica quote. Don't be weird.
This is our guiding principle. That is the whole of the law now. Don't be weird.
Don't be weird. Be chill.
Yeah.
Those are our two tenets of HE lore. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we bring it in?
Yeah. My final thing, just a message to Aleister Crowley. Yeah. Take a hike.
So with that being said, thank you for listening to another wonderful, informative episode of Historica Esoterica. I have been Roswell. You have been Matt. We don't do this. I don't know why I'm doing this.
No, we don't. Oh, wait, did we do plugs?
Let's do
Hang
plugs.
On, I don't remember. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Facebook, we've got one.
We do have a Facebook now. It's a Facebook page. I still don't entirely know how those work.
It's your drunk aunt on there. She needs to know about Alice.
Search Historic Esoterica. We're on Facebook. Like I said, just share. Maybe I think there's like an invite your Facebook friends button.
Ooh,
just shake things up. Send it to your high school girlfriend.
I was about to say that. Send it to everyone you knew in high school that you have not talked to in 10 years.
Yeah. This will be a good way to let them know how you're doing.
A cry for help or a call to action, you decide.
And of course, we're still on Instagram at Historica Esoterica, still on Twitter at Hist Esoteric. You follow us on whatever you're listening to us on right now.
Yeah.
And I will note, like I said, I know we've now talked about him for 2 hours, but there's still plenty of stuff to talk about with Aleister Crowley.
Definitely.
So I fear this may not be the end of it. We're probably, because we skimmed over a lot of the magic stuff.
Yeah.
We just sort of mentioned that it happened. We may, when we feel like reading gross things, we might revisit this and, maybe delve a little more in after putting on gloves.
Yeah.
So, just follow us and let us know if there's something you want us to talk about.
Yeah, please. Also, I guess we've been thinking about doing like a more chill, maybe Q&A type episode. So if you've got any questions for us that you'd like us to answer or about us, you can send them to us over social media or whatever. And maybe we'll answer those at some point in the near future.
Yeah. If we start doing something big, something research heavy, we might just do a hangout episode.
Yeah.
Just
or
take it a little easy.
That might also not happen. So
yeah.
But send the questions anyway.
Send the questions.
What do you got to list?
Yeah. I will answer you if you DM me on Instagram. I've got nothing better to do, so feel free to hit me up.
Absolutely. And I think with all that, have a nice week, dear listeners. And until next time, I believe in miracles.
I fell into the trap of the black magic, Kabbalism, the whole idea of just the Crowleyism of the times. It was a significant part of that middle point of the 70s, and I really got completely disoriented by all that. It was an awful, dreadful period for me.
The whole Beatle idea was to do what you want, right? To take your own responsibility, do what you want, and try not to harm other people, right? Do what thou wilt, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody. John Lennon, in an interview with Playboy magazine. No, we should do that with the American accent, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
I had to read it out.
I was trying so hard not to laugh. Your Beatle accent got worse with every word.
Yeah, I know, because I was trying not to laugh. All right. We'll release this part as like the extended cut.
Yeah.